Walking through the corridors of Stanford University, I glanced into open office doors. Students were bustling all around. The time displayed 12:30, usually the time when I would head to lunch with my friend Tanaka in the university cafeteria. However, he was nowhere to be seen today, and he wasn't answering his phone. It made me slightly anxious. Where could he have disappeared to? Just then, one of his students, Jennifer, walked by. I stopped her and asked, "Excuse me, Jennifer, have you happened to see Professor Tanaka today?" She confirmed that she had seen him in the morning in the laboratory. Grateful for the information, I quickly headed there. After a short walk, I reached the lab and upon entering immediately spotted my friend. He was completely engrossed in his work, staring intently into a microscope. I called out his name, but he didn't respond, so absorbed was he in his observations. What could have captured his attention so completely? Approaching cautiously, I touched his shoulder gently. Tanaka started, his eyes red as if he hadn't blinked for a long time, and an expression of surprise mixed with concern froze on his face. He realized it was me and let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, it's you, Daniel," he said, regaining his composure. "I'm sorry, I got completely lost in my work." His voice sounded somewhat distant, as if a part of his consciousness still remained in the microscopic world he was studying. "By the way, I'm glad you came. I have something to show you." He leaned over the microscope and, using a pair of tweezers, carefully extracted an object from it. Bringing it closer to my face, Tanaka showed me a pink petal, a cherry blossom petal, seemingly entirely ordinary and unremarkable at first glance. I looked at it with confusion, unsure of what I was supposed to see on this petal. Seeing my bewilderment, Tanaka smiled slyly, placed the petal back under the microscope, and invited me to take a look. With some skepticism, I leaned in to see what was there. Under the microscope's lens, I saw something frightening. Millions of thin threads, intertwining and writhing, formed not just a complex structure, but something akin to a living organism, filled with restless movement. These threads pulsed like the blood vessels of an unknown creature hidden within the depths of the petal. Each sinuous thread seemed charged with dark energy, turning the entire petal into a maze with no way out. They resembled tiny worms or tentacles that could break free at any moment and coil around my finger. It seemed eternally hungry, eager to escape and spill into our world. Shocked, I recoiled from the microscope and asked in fear what it was. Tanaka, seeing my reaction, nodded with understanding. "I had a similar reaction," he began, his eyes reflecting a mixture of amazement and concern. "This petal was delivered to me in the mail. I have no idea from whom. The envelope only had a signature, Yakushima Island, Japan. When I opened it and found the petal inside, I initially thought it was some sort of joke. I was about to throw it away, but something made me look at it under the microscope. It was midnight, and I stayed at the university longer than usual. And when I saw what was hidden inside the petal, I nearly lost my composure. Believe me, it looks even more ominous at night." We were both in awe as we examined the petal, trying to unravel its mystery. There were many signs pointing to its extraterrestrial origin, but we couldn't be certain. On Earth, scientists discover around 50 new species every day, leaving room for doubts and speculations. Despite the vast number of known species, the world constantly surprises us, unveiling new mysteries, and this petal could be another discovery that would reshape our understanding. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was time to head to our lectures. We agreed to return to the lab after work and conduct a series of experiments with this unusual petal. The day flew by, but thoughts of the mysterious plant haunted me. As soon as the final bell rang, I practically rushed out of the lecture hall, much to the surprise of the students. Upon reaching the lab, I found Tanaka engrossed in an experiment. He was bent over the microscope, holding a pipette with which he carefully dropped various reagents onto the petal of the unknown plant. He began with the simplest plain water. However, there was no reaction. The microscopic thread seemed to repel the water, pushing it away without leaving the slightest trace. Looking into the microscope's eyepiece, I witnessed this astonishing phenomenon with my own eyes. The water, upon touching the surface, didn't get absorbed but rolled off, leaving no mark behind. Our curiosity grew, and like children enthralled by a new toy, we started testing various reagents. However, it seemed these threads possessed incredible resilience. None of our reagents, not even acids, could harm them significantly. When we tried pouring hydrochloric acid onto them, the reaction was so minimal it could hardly be considered one. It felt as though this plant behaved like an irritated cat being bothered during its sleep. The night passed in fruitless attempts to unlock the mystery of this petal. I tried touching it with my fingers and noticed a slight reaction. The petal seemed to be trying to envelop my finger, but an invisible barrier prevented it from doing so. Tanaka noticed this observation and was struck with inspiration. He carefully placed the petal back under the microscope, then, taking a small needle, pricked his own finger and dripped blood onto the petal. A reaction followed immediately. The petal eagerly absorbed the blood, much like a sponge absorbing water. We watched this under the microscope, unable to hide our horror. Millions of threads came to life with joyful and greedy movement, absorbing the blood. And as a result of this process, they became brighter, pinker, and appeared more elastic. This discovery left us perplexed and intrigued. Could this plant be a predator? Questions about the origin and nature of this plant, which reacted so actively to blood, involuntarily arose. Repeated experiments consistently yielded the same result. The petal, with an insatiable thirst, absorbed the blood without leaving a drop behind. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was approaching 5 a.m., and the laboratory was still immersed in pre-dawn darkness. Despite the long hours of research, our enthusiasm remained unshaken. Tanaka, never losing his creative approach, suggested a new direction for our experiments, testing how the petal would react to various metals. We easily found the necessary samples in the lab and arranged them in a row. Copper, aluminum, iron, silver, and several other metals awaited their turn for testing. Upon contact with metals, the petal remained indifferent until we touched it with silver. This moment was a turning point in our experiments. As soon as the silver object approached the petal, the plant displayed an unexpectedly aggressive reaction. The petal started writhing and behaving as if it was energized by some invisible force. But each movement seemed to drain its strength, and it slowly withered before our eyes. This unexpected reaction to silver made both Tanaka and me exchange astonished glances. After dripping blood onto the petal once again, it seemed to resurrect, regaining its lost energy. However, when we approached it with silver once more, the plant again entered an aggressive state. These experiments continued until an unforeseen mishap occurred. At the moment when I brought the silver close to the petal and Tanaka was busy recording the reaction, my hand unexpectedly trembled, and a piece of silver fell directly onto the petal. It seemed to emit a piercing scream, though it was impossible to hear, but by its convulsions, we could tell it was experiencing agony. I didn't have time to remove the metal before it seemed to ignite and burn without flames, leaving only tiny ash fragments on the microscope slide. At that very moment, when the petal turned to ashes, the laboratory window burst open with a loud bang, piercing the silence of the night. A strong gust of wind rushed into the room, lifting paper sheets into the air and creating chaos on the work desks. It seemed some force was displeased with what had happened. Tanaka and I exchanged helpless glances. What were we going to do now, and who would believe our experiments? Our curiosity knew no bounds. Was this creation a living thing, a plant or an animal? Or had we stumbled upon an entirely new species, previously unknown to science? Questions swirled in our minds, causing as much excitement as they did concern. We decided it was time to rest and collect our thoughts. With a heavy sense of unfinished business, we went our separate ways. The next day, we began investigating the only clue we had: the inscription mentioning the island. We found out that this island was located south of the main islands of Japan and, despite its remoteness, was inhabited. The island was famous for its ancient forests, where cedar trees, some over 1,000 years old, grew. It was also a popular tourist destination. On the calendar, it was June 5th, and during our discussions, we decided to complete our current tasks and head to Japan in August. Time passed quickly, and now we were at Tokyo's airport. From there, without wasting any time, we immediately took a domestic flight to Kagoshima, the city that served as the gateway to our ultimate destination. Upon arriving in Kagoshima, we headed to the port, where a ferry was already waiting for us. It was August 13th, and Japan was celebrating the holiday called Obon, a festival for honoring the deceased, which lasted for 3 days. During these days, when people rushed to return to their hometowns, the queue for the ferry was simply enormous. Apparently, like us, everyone was eager to cross the sea in search of something important or simply to return home to their families. Standing in this endless line of waiting people, I couldn't help but doubt whether we would be able to board. Fortunately, luck was on our side. We managed to navigate through the crowd and, against all our fears, get onto the ferry. The people on board seemed happy, and an atmosphere of celebration filled the air. Tanaka looked around with curiosity. It was his first trip to Japan, as he was born in the United States in New Jersey. During the voyage, I started asking locals if they knew anything about a living sakura. However, they just shook their heads in confusion. When the ferry slowly entered the port on Yakushima, the first thing that caught our eyes were the outlines of dense evergreen forests that came close to the shore. The air was saturated with the scent of the sea and freshness, and the sounds of nature mingled with the hum of the arriving ship. The port turned out to be small but bustling. It was located at the mouth of a river that divided the town into 2 parts. People were bustling around, either meeting their relatives or, like us, preparing for the start of their adventure. Despite its modest size, the port was well organized, and every local we had a chance to talk to displayed friendliness and hospitality. In the port, we were greeted by a local guide we had hired in advance. She was a young woman named Haruko. She was only 20 years old, but her manner of communication and knowledge seemed far beyond her age. Haruko was of short stature, with long black hair that she neatly tied up in a bun. Her eyes were deep and clear, and her smile was so genuine that it immediately endeared her to us. When we asked Haruko about the living sakura, hoping that a local guide could shed light on our mystery, she replied negatively. Her lack of knowledge seemed both strange and disheartening to us. If even she, growing up amidst the island's mysteries and legends, had not heard of such a phenomenon, what chance did we have of finding it ourselves? Despite the brief disappointment, we decided to continue our search and set out to explore the town. It amazed us with its cozy and peaceful atmosphere. Narrow streets wound between low houses adorned with flowers and greenery. Small shops offering everything necessary for travelers and local souvenirs, as well as cafes, wafted the aromas of freshly prepared food. We also noticed that the streets of Miyanoura were preparing for the upcoming Obon Festival, also known as the Festival of Lanterns. Along the sidewalks, at the entrances to houses and in gardens, lanterns of various shapes and sizes hung, from classic paper ones to exquisite handmade ones, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and warmth. The light of the lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing reflections on the ground and walls, giving the city a cozy and festive mood. Our guide told us that Obon in Japan is a time when, according to beliefs, the souls of ancestors return to the world of the living to visit their loved ones. People decorate their homes with lanterns to guide the souls and hold various events, such as Bon Odori, traditional dances around drums, to honor and entertain the ancestral spirits. As we admired the beauty of the city, it seemed that information about the living Sakura was hidden from us in some mysterious way. Soon, Haruko led us to a narrow alley where time seemed to stand still. Ancient houses with traditional roofs and narrow cobblestone paths immersed us in a sense of the past. After walking down this alley, we stopped at the door of an old shop that seemed to bridge the gap between the present and history. Inside, we were greeted by an elderly man. He traded in various antique items, each of which seemed to carry a piece of the island's history. Shelves and racks were filled with ancient books, jewelry, porcelain, and a multitude of other things, each of which could tell its unique story. The elderly man, sitting behind the counter, observed us attentively, his eyes shining with curiosity. Haruko greeted him politely and introduced us. His name was Kiyoji. He was a true guardian of the island's stories, having lived here for all of his 90 years. When Haruko leaned towards him and asked something, her voice sounded respectful and clear, crossing the barriers of age and hearing. Kiyoji, after briefly looking at us with surprise, paused for a moment in thought and then replied, "I haven't heard of a living sakura, but on our island there is a legend about a sakura tree that blooms eternally. They say it has spread in one of the mountainous groves, surrounded by ancient cedars. Access there is nearly impossible because the place is guarded by spirits. Legends claim that only one person has ever found it and returned, but that person lost their sanity. To reach the grove, guides are needed. They appear here during Obon, luring unsuspecting travelers into their trap. The islanders are well aware of them and avoid such encounters. The mysterious guides last appeared here about 20 years ago. If you're lucky, you might encounter them in the main square during the Obon festival." Glancing at Tanaka, we tried to understand who these mysterious guides could be and whether our upcoming adventure concealed unexpected dangers. Thanking Kiyoji for his story, we headed to the square, determined to see for ourselves who these people were and whether it was worth venturing into the unknown with them. Arriving at the square half an hour later, we found ourselves in the heart of the evening fair. Joy and excitement filled the air. Lanterns softly illuminated the streets, adding a sense of festive charm. The fair was bustling with life. Local sweets, decorations, and toys attracted attention, and children enthusiastically darted between the stands, playing games and trying to catch fish. Our attention was also drawn to a small performance. A man in a devil's mask moved briskly from side to side, evoking laughter and delight among the spectators. People, laughing heartily, threw beans at him. It was an ancient ritual believed to drive away evil spirits and bring good luck. As we observed the festive hustle and bustle, Haruko drew our attention to two figures that immediately stood out from the rest. A small group of people had already gathered around them, dressed as travelers, while the local residents preferred to keep their distance. The first of them was dressed in a colorful carnival costume, his face hidden behind a red mask with a long nose, symbolizing some spirit. He appeared lively and mischievous, dancing playfully and attracting tourists to himself. In his hands, he held a sign written in Japanese, announcing a tour to the ever-blooming Sakura Grove. His behavior was so playful and childlike that it couldn't help but bring a smile to our faces. The second man, on the contrary, made a completely different impression. Tall and incredibly handsome, he was dressed in an elegant suit that made him look important and influential. Onlookers sighed and turned their heads as they passed by, unable to take their eyes off him. His posture was strict and majestic, and his gaze through thin glasses was piercing and evaluative. He held a notepad in his hand, carefully jotting down something, adding an aura of mystery to his presence. His appearance exuded danger, yet at the same time he was alluring and enchanting, as if beneath his stern facade lay profound secrets. Approaching closer, we caught the attention of the man in the formal suit. His smile, which blossomed instantly, was truly mesmerizing, although it also triggered some unease in us. With grace, he addressed us in flawless English, which was yet another surprise. "Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I see that our offer has caught your attention. My name is Kitsune, and my colleague is Yami. Would you like to take part in a tour to the magnificent grove where a unique sakura tree blooms endlessly, never withering a day? We depart in just half an hour, and there are only a few spots left. I would advise you to hurry." When Haruko inquired if it was safe to embark on such a journey at night, he confidently replied, "Oh no, there's no danger at all. We'll have enough people with us, and upon arrival you'll find a comfortable hotel awaiting you." I asked the question that had been bothering me the most. If a sakura tree that blooms year-round is such a unique phenomenon, why do so few people, even here on the island, know about it? I understand your puzzlement. The thing is, our grove is also a sacred place, traditionally opened for visits only once every few decades. That's why so few people know about it. This is indeed a unique opportunity for you to witness this wonder with your own eyes. Stepping back a bit, we gathered in a circle to discuss the offer. Tanaka was full of enthusiasm as we were presented with a chance to see the very plant that had mysteriously manifested itself in the lab. Haruko also supported the idea, as opportunities like this were rare. It was only I who hesitated, feeling a slight unease about the situation. The entire conversation seemed too good to be true. In the end, we decided to embark on the journey. While Haruko delved into the details with the tour organizer and inquired about the prices, we got distracted by the performance of the second man in the mask. His dance exuded magnetism and mystery, and when his gaze met ours, it seemed like a sly smile flickered beneath the mask. Suddenly interrupting his act, he effortlessly leapt towards us, stooped down, and asked a question in impeccable English. "Before we depart, wouldn't you like to see something truly interesting?" "And what might that be?" I asked with curiosity. "You'll see for yourselves. Just follow me into this alley," he mysteriously proposed. "Aren't you planning to rob us there?" I asked with some caution. "Oh no, how could you think such a thing of me?" The man in the mask playfully clasped his hands over his heart, feigning offense. "I'm nothing but good-hearted," he declared, chuckling. Tanaka and I exchanged doubtful glances, but curiosity got the better of us. Choosing to follow this eccentric guide, we headed toward the indicated alley. Our new acquaintance, already walking ahead without looking back, seemed confident in our decision to follow him. Upon entering the narrow alley, we soon noticed that we were surrounded by deep semi-darkness, and, to our surprise, there was not a soul in sight. Only a solitary lantern cast a dim glow, as if it were about to extinguish at any moment. Following our unusual guide, we suddenly stopped at an even narrower passage where only a couple of people could barely squeeze through. The man pointed to something in the darkness which we could hardly see, so we approached to get a closer look. At that moment, the lantern started flickering even more intensely and abruptly went out, enveloping us in thick darkness. I felt fear creeping in. When I turned to look back, I noticed that the man in the mask was still standing behind us, his arms crossed over his chest. My attention was diverted by the fact that Tanaka had started tugging at my sleeve. When I turned to him, his face was pale with fear, and he pointed deeper into the dark alley. Staring intently, I could just make out a creature resembling a goblin with an unnaturally long tongue, which it dragged through a pile of trash with evident pleasure. The creature licked and devoured the remnants from cans, emitting contented sounds. When its gaze met ours, it froze in surprise, then displayed a wicked grin and began moving slowly in our direction. We stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. Tanaka, appearing ready to bolt at any moment, asked me with a trembling voice if we should continue on this path. Caught in hesitation myself, I couldn't provide a clear answer. In the silence, Haruko's voice suddenly interrupted our confusion. "What are you doing here?" Her displeased expression caught us off guard. Turning around to look back at the alley, we found that the creature had mysteriously vanished, and the lantern had brightly illuminated again. The man in the mask burst into loud laughter, slicing through the night's silence. He began dancing as if underscoring his playful role, and then headed towards the exit of the alley. His words, thrown over his shoulder, sounded almost challenging. "We're just having fun, nothing more." We stood there, astonished and frightened by the incident in the alley. Haruko, placing her hands on our shoulders, reminded us that time was of the essence, and we needed to proceed. Tanaka, still frozen in place with a pale face and downcast eyes, questioned me with doubt in his voice, wondering if we should continue on this path. I caught myself hesitating in my response. Our guide, standing a bit ahead of us, seemed impatient, perhaps preferring to leave us to our own contemplation of the mystical and unexplained events. Following Haruka, we approached a small bus that was already nearly full of passengers. Inside, I counted around 13 people. We managed to find seats at the back of the bus and settled in comfortably. After a short while, Kitsune in his suit and his ominous partner Yami also took their seats at the front, and the bus smoothly started moving. To our surprise, instead of heading towards the mountains, we were heading towards the port. Upon arrival, Kitsune explained that it would be quicker and easier to reach our destination by boat. We descended to the pier where a large fishing boat awaited us, equipped with handrails and rows of seats along the sides. Taking our seats, we held onto the handrails tightly. The boat started with some difficulty, and we set off on our journey. A gentle breeze pleasantly cooled our faces, and although night had fallen over the island, the full moon brightly illuminated our voyage, adding a touch of mystical beauty to the scenery. My attention was drawn to glowing streaks beneath the water, resembling playful dolphins following the boat. Pointing at them to Haruka, I was surprised when she admitted that she couldn't see anything. Only Tanaka confirmed my observations. Could it be that some sort of hypnosis or the influence of an unknown gas was still affecting us? After half an hour, we approached another shore where a small pier awaited us. The sandy beach gently met the edge of the sea, and the trees seemed to emerge directly from the water, creating a secluded and almost fairy tale-like landscape. The pier welcomed us with lanterns whose lights stretched along the path leading straight into the mountains. The impressed passengers from the boat couldn't conceal their amazement at such grandeur. I, too, felt awe-struck, standing before this breathtaking sight. After docking, we disembarked and, forming a long line, headed towards the mountains. Our path led us along a trail winding through the trees bordered by ropes. Rows of lanterns hung on both sides of the trail, casting a soft light to guide our way. After about an hour and a half of walking, and astounded by the number of lanterns installed for just a dozen travelers, we finally reached the hotel situated at the foot of the mountain. The hotel was a cozy two-story building, designed in a traditional style with a tiled roof that glistened beautifully in the moonlight. The facade was adorned with wood carvings depicting elements of the local flora and fauna, giving the building a unique charm. Around the hotel, a small but well-kept garden featured stone pathways leading to the entrance and low bushes carefully pruned into animal shapes. At the entrance to the hotel, an elderly man greeted us. With a respectful bow, he escorted us to our rooms. I couldn't help but notice that his gaze lingered on Tanaka for a moment with slight surprise, a detail that didn't escape my friend's notice either. Tanaka suddenly tensed, as if long-forgotten memories had been triggered in his mind. After we settled in our rooms, I took the opportunity to freshen up in the shower. When I decided to visit Tanaka, I found him deep in thought, sitting on the bed. Approaching him, I asked what he was thinking about. Tanaka shared his doubts with me, asserting that the face of the man at the entrance had seemed familiar to him. He suddenly pulled out his wallet and retrieved an old black-and-white photograph, which he then showed me. On the photo, a young couple held a child in their arms, with what appeared to be their parents standing beside them. "That's him for sure," Tanaka confidently declared, pointing to one of the men in the photo. Upon closer examination, I recognized the man in the photograph as the same elderly man at the entrance. Despite the years leaving their mark on his face, his features remained recognizable. Tanaka told me that the man in the photo was his paternal grandfather, who had disappeared when Tanaka was still a child. He knew him only from old photographs. The discovery had shaken Tanaka to the core, and he sat there as if in shock. I wondered if this very grandfather could have sent the sakura petal. At that moment, our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. I stood up, opened it, and saw the elderly man standing in the doorway, the same man we had just been discussing. He nervously glanced around and asked if he could enter. I let him in, and Tanaka got up to greet him. Recognizing his grandson, the old man couldn't hold back his tears and embraced him tightly. When the emotions settled a bit, he expressed his surprise at seeing us and inquired about how we ended up here and what brought us to this place. We told him about the sakura petal, and his expression changed abruptly. He solemnly warned us that we were in danger and needed to leave immediately. Tanaka was about to ask questions, but Kitsune, who had appeared in the doorway, interrupted our conversation. He sternly questioned why the old man was here. "What are you doing here, old man? Go! Your clients are waiting for you," he said firmly. The old man, frightened, bowed and quickly made his way to the exit. After the departure of the old man and Kitsune, Haruka entered our room looking concerned and asked what had happened. We shared everything that had transpired and our concerns about the current situation. We concluded that something truly mysterious and potentially dangerous was happening beneath the surface of this picturesque journey. It was clear that behind the facade of a scenic trip and beautiful landscapes lay a deep enigma that required our investigation. At dawn the following day, around 8 in the morning, we were awakened. We headed to the dining hall, where breakfast awaited us. It became evident that only one person worked at the hotel: Tanaka's grandfather. After the events of the previous evening, he pretended as if he didn't know us and actively avoided our attention. It deeply saddened Tanaka to see his own grandfather working here. After finishing breakfast, we stepped out onto the courtyard in front of the hotel. There, Kitsune was waiting for us in his usual business suit, which was quite surprising given the attire for our upcoming mountain journey. One of the tourists asked when we would head into the forest. Kitsune explained that the gates to the forest would only open on the 3rd day of the festival, so we would be able to visit it tomorrow evening. Until then, he suggested we explore other attractions on the island. Soon, Yami, the mysterious man in the mask, joined us, and together we continued our journey. Following a narrow trail, passing by a babbling stream, and through dense cedar groves, we enjoyed the breathtaking views. Kitsune explained that our goal was to reach a waterfall. However, as we emerged into a spacious clearing, I encountered a sight that was far from ordinary. Coming toward us along the path was a white sphere with tiny legs. The creature had no eyes, just a huge mouth. When I turned to see if anyone else noticed it, it seemed that no one else did, except for Tanaka, who also stared at it with a shocked expression. To my surprise, Haruka, approaching from behind, pushed Tanaka, snapping him out of his trance. He glanced at me and nodded toward the creature, confirming that he could see it as well. However, Haruka, upon noticing our reactions, advised us to keep walking and not pay it any heed. It remained unclear whether she could see the creature or not. When the sphere reached our level, our guides nodded at it in greeting, and it responded in kind before continuing on its way. We followed Haruka's advice and continued walking, trying not to pay attention to our surroundings. When the creature stopped next to us, I felt it scrutinizing us suspiciously, but we kept ignoring it, and eventually it retreated. This allowed me to finally breathe freely. I couldn't help but think that we needed to leave this place as soon as possible, but when I looked at Tanaka, I understood that we couldn't abandon his family here. Upon reaching the waterfall, we discovered its incredible beauty. The other tourists scattered around, which gave us an opportunity to talk. We approached Haruka to get her opinion on what had happened, but she just smiled mysteriously, pretending not to understand what we were talking about. We continued to question her, but she continued to deny everything. The day passed without further supernatural incidents. Our guides took us to a few more interesting places, and we returned to the hotel. The next day had no scheduled activities, as our much-anticipated excursion to the Sakura Forest was in the evening. In anticipation of this event, each of us decided to spend the day in our own way. Haruka mentioned that she needed to check some things and disappeared for the entire day. Tanaka attempted to make contact with Hiroshi, his grandfather, but the old man avoided meeting him. I went for a walk in the forest and then descended to the pier, trying to explore potential escape routes as my unease persisted. All signs pointed to something dark and inexplicable lurking beneath the surface of this picturesque journey, and I tried to decipher what awaited us. Exhausted by my thoughts, I found a place to rest under a tree near the trail. Lost in contemplation about the upcoming events, I suddenly heard voices in the distance. Among them, I recognized the distinctive tone of Yami, the man in the mask. I couldn't discern with whom he was speaking or what they were discussing. You know, that old man Hiroshi couldn't stop bragging about his grandson. He bored me with his stories. Do you think I left everything as it is? Of course not. I brought his grandson right to him to surprise the old man. You should have seen his face at that moment. Yami was laughing as he spoke, and their laughter gradually faded into the distance. Hearing these words, a puzzle began to form in my mind. So, this is the person who sent the sakura petal. But the question remained. How did he know where to find Hiroshi's grandson? And how did he know what Tanaka did for a living? If he were an ordinary person, he might have thrown that letter away. It appeared that these individuals knew a lot, making them even more dangerous. Returning to the hotel, I immediately shared my observations with Tanaka. After hearing the conversation about Yami and Hiroshi, we concluded that as soon as the opportunity arose, we needed to leave this place. Evening was approaching, and soon Haruka returned, choosing to keep her whereabouts a secret. All the guests gathered in front of the hotel, filled with anticipation of seeing the Sakura forest. Without much delay, our familiar pair of guides led us to the base of the mountain. As we were about to set off, the old man approached us discreetly. With caution, he handed us a silver knife. Then, without a word, he slowly turned and walked away, leaving us in contemplation. Haruka quickly approached Tanaka, skillfully took the silver knife from him, and discreetly stashed it away. Her actions caught us off guard, but we refrained from asking questions. Understanding that every moment counted, we collected our thoughts and followed the others. The path was illuminated by lanterns, and in the sky, the full moon shone majestically, casting its mysterious light all around. The ascent was long, but eventually we left the cedar forests behind, and in front of us stood ancient gates with intricate carvings. Next to them were wooden statues of a cat and a fox no taller than a human. Kitsune, approaching the gates, knocked on them and bowed, after which they creaked open by themselves, eliciting awe from the tourists. Before us lay the Sakura forest, filled with Japanese cherry trees with dark burgundy trunks and delicately pink petals swaying gracefully in the wind. Witnessing such a scene in the middle of August was truly astonishing. As the guests dispersed through the garden, taking photographs of the surrounding beauty, I approached one of the trees, trying to determine if it was the same kind we had studied in the laboratory. After a thorough examination, I found nothing unusual and attempted to pluck a petal. However, my attempt was in vain. The petal wouldn't yield, giving the impression that I was tugging at an artificial flower from a store. I then tried to break a branch, but it bent like rubber and returned to its original position. Calling Tanaka, I shared my observations about the unusual properties of the tree. Together, we were surprised as we examined it, trying to unravel the mystery of its origin. Our contemplations were interrupted by Kitsune, who invited us to join the upcoming ritual. We arrived at an open circular platform surrounded by cherry blossoms. In the center stood an altar with a bowl filled with clear liquid. Around the altar were low pillars adorned with burning candles. We were positioned around the altar in a circle with the other guests. Haruka stood beside me, and next to her was Tanaka. Once everyone had taken their places, Yami, the masked man, began to perform a ritual dance around the altar to the accompaniment of sudden drum beats. Then, Kitsune approached the bowl and began to chant a melody in an unfamiliar language, different from Japanese. This procession captivated the tourists in attendance. When the chanting ceased, Kitsune addressed the gathered crowd in Japanese, starting to tell the story associated with the ritual. Haruka promptly began translating his words. This grove is one of the oldest and most sacred places on our island. According to legend, it emerged here over 1,000 years ago and has since been an object of deep reverence. The ancients believed that the grove embodies a deity, bestowing favor and protection on those who serve it, providing not only spiritual but also material prosperity. As Kitsune spoke, I couldn't help but notice that the candle flames around the altar were extinguishing one by one, as if under the influence of an unseen force. Turning to my companions to gauge their reactions, my attention was drawn to Haruka, who was gazing at the bowl on the altar. I noticed that the clear liquid in the bowl was becoming cloudy, gradually taking on a rosy hue. Kitsune continued. However, the most remarkable feature of this grove is its ability to produce a unique fruit. Once every 500 years, under the rare alignment of stars, one of the trees in the grove blooms and bears fruit, gifting only one fruit. From this fruit, according to legends, a legendary being may be born, possessing extraordinary wisdom and magical abilities. As the candle flames continued to extinguish one by one, leaving only a few faint glimmers, the liquid in the bowl turned a deep red, growing darker with each passing second. A growing sense of tension and an anticipation of something unknown sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, Haruka leaned towards me. In her eyes, I saw worry and incipient panic. Speaking quietly to avoid being overheard, she warned us to be prepared to flee. I already had an intuitive sense that danger was approaching and was ready for action. Kitsune, seemingly in a state of ecstasy, continued his ritual. Spreading his arms and raising them to the sky, he declared, "And now I shall say that soon, our mother will grant us a brother or sister, and you have been chosen to be the key to this event." Just as his words dissipated into the air, a strong wind suddenly arose, quickly snuffing out the last candle. The lanterns surrounding us also went out one after another, leaving us in complete darkness, except for the cold light of the moon rising in the night sky above us. Then a piercing cry of pain rang out. At first, it was a desperate female voice calling for help, followed by a male scream. A horrifying scene unfolded before me. The branches of the cherry blossoms transformed into thread-like appendages, ensnaring and piercing one person after another, draining their life force. The panicked cries and screams created a terrifying tableau as people attempted to flee, but the bloodthirsty branches reached them wherever they went. At that moment, Haruka decisively grabbed me and pulled me towards the exit. Tanaka and I, focused on escaping, put all our strength into breaking free from this nightmare. However, when one of the branches seized me, I couldn't help but cry out. Haruka swiftly drew a silver knife from her pouch and cut the branch, freeing me. We continued our desperate escape, leaving behind the screams and chaos. Every step we took was fraught with fear and horror at the unfolding nightmare. The cherry blossoms, transformed into predatory entities, relentlessly pursued anyone within their reach. Exhausted but fueled by adrenaline, we raced forward, all the while fearing that death might catch up to us. In the end, we managed to break free from the nightmare, passing through the gates. We didn't stop, but kept running. We were powerless to help those who remained in the grove. Haruka looked at us with a mixture of sorrow and determination, saying, "I should have realized sooner that the grove has a life of its own. Perhaps then, we could have saved more lives." We exchanged bewildered looks, full of questions for her. But before we could ask, Kitsune suddenly appeared from the darkness. He gazed at us with calm curiosity before saying, "It's amazing that you managed to survive. Girl, I didn't like you from the start, but that's even better. Now I have a snack as well." Suddenly his body began to convulse and his clothes tore apart, revealing a body covered in fur. His face elongated, taking on animalistic features, and enormous sharp teeth grew from his mouth. Before us stood a werewolf, resembling a humanoid fox. He prepared to leap, preparing to attack, when suddenly Haruka appeared before us. Without looking back, she sternly ordered us to leave the island immediately. Barely finishing her sentence, Haruka began to undergo her own transformation. Tanaka and I watched in astonishment and shock as a creature, slightly smaller than a human but significantly larger than an ordinary tanuki, materialized before us. It seemed that even Kitsune was taken by surprise by this transformation, but he quickly regained his composure, growled, and directed his aggression towards Haruka. A fierce battle erupted between them, a horrifying sight to behold. At this critical moment, Tanaka grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the pier. In passing, I noticed a silver knife lying nearby, picked it up, and followed Tanaka, carrying the cold weapon with us in case of a new, unexpected challenge on our path to safety. We ran down the trail, grateful that it was impossible to get lost here. When we were getting close to the hotel, we heard a commotion behind us and increased our pace out of fear. Upon reaching the hotel, Tanaka began calling for his grandfather. However, suddenly Yami, the masked man, landed in front of us. With a malevolent look, he addressed us. "Where are you rushing to, my friends? I haven't finished playing with you yet." With these words, he removed his mask, revealing the grotesque, wickedly grinning face of a cat. In the next moment, he swiftly seized Tanaka and lifted him into the air with one hand. I rushed at him with the knife, but he easily pushed me back with a powerful kick, sending the knife tumbling aside. As Yami raised his other hand to strike, I thought it was the end. But then from behind, the old man leaped at him, armed with the same silver knife. With determination, he plunged it into the monster's chest. Yami howled and tossed Tanaka aside. Rushing to my friend's aid, I helped him up while the old man, not letting go of Yami, continued to stab him with the knife. The monster roared in pain, but the old man held him firmly, shouting at us, "Run!" Tears streamed from his eyes as he added, "Forgive me for bringing you here." In desperation, Tanaka let out a piercing cry as the monster, with a powerful leap, carried the old man into the depths of the dark bushes. Rage and pain were evident in his voice. I patted him on the shoulder, offering my sympathy, and said it was time for us to leave. We quickly reached the pier where a boat came into view, our only chance for salvation. Without hesitation, we jumped into it, untied it, and sailed away from the shore. As we left the island, we couldn't tear our eyes away from its ominous contours, shrouded in the darkness of the night. Thoughts of Haruka and Tanaka's grandfather swirled in our heads. We wondered if they had survived and what their fate had been after our escape. The answers remained beyond our comprehension, veiled in the mist of uncertainty. On this night, as we sailed further and further away, we left behind not only the enigmatic forests of the island, but also a part of our hearts filled with concern for the fate of those we had to leave behind. So, as we sailed away, we silently shared the bitterness of loss and the hope for a new day that might bring answers to our tormenting questions.